I would like to welcome everyone here. I'd like to welcome you at home. I'd like to welcome everyone here. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. So great to see all of you again. Just a little quick introduction, because at the beginning of a lecture, that's often, of interest. Certainly at the beginning of a series, just kind of like, what are we doing? I think that's a relevant question. Last semester, had an idea that instead of the usual in which, oh, maybe I'll give a talk this Tuesday, the third Tuesday of the month, and next month, the seventh Monday, or just like this a regular thing, to make a series, that kind of like how to start, how to beginning, how to theme, and just, to see how it went. And I was just completely amazed by the result. I mean, we had, and as a lot of you know, we had hundreds of people over the course of the 15 weeks. I recorded them. I put the videos online. Last I checked, well over 1,000 views, which I've given plenty of talks to 2 people. So just that volume. Welcome, everyone, welcome. That volume was just such, hey, welcome. Such a pleasant surprise. And one thing we had to do every now and then, so far we don't have to, but I propped open the door next door. I might run and grab a few more chairs if needed. So last semester, the theme was Birds of Orange County. Hey, I'm going to introduce a little bit, but we'd love to have you introduce as well. So sure, sure. So we had this theme of Birds of Orange County. It is it is an interest. Plus, we were, at the same time, a lot of the members here were members of the Orange County Audubon Society, and some who weren't then joined and came out on bird hikes with us, and we had a wonderful time. Some people were members of the Bashkill Area Association, where we do some bird hikes, and some weren't, and then went to and saw eagles for the first time at the Bashkill. So just, a lot of organizations in our area. The Mearns Bird Club, we have a great photographer from Mearns here. So if these types of things are an interest to you, you have people, you have a community here, and we go on walks. I'll be leading a bird hike, as you could read at the presentation centers here at OCAS, at the Liberty Loop, where there are some short-eared owls. That's a great place to see them next Tuesday evening. Coming up soon, we'll be doing stuff at the Bashkill. Hopefully the eagles will nest there. We'll have spotting scopes on the nest throughout the season. So if this type of stuff interests you, once again, we would love to have you. And there's just so many great organizations studying the diversity here. Because I thought, rather than repeat all of the lectures from last fall, maybe do a whole new set. Because, welcome, this is a lecture on microbes. Welcome. Great. So just talk about everything other than birds, although we'll mention bird migrations and winter wildlife next week, so birds will certainly come into it. But a lot of the people here, they're not just interested in birds, but all of the great biodiversity and wildlife we have. One of the examples I often give, that usually comes right back, there we go, is our great birder in our department, Dr. Joe Zarobczyk. When he got his doctorate, was it on birds? No, it was on plants. Why? It was on the plants that the birds were eating. Because as we tied at the end of the next last series, even if you're interested in just one of these groups, there are bird people, there are bug people, there are reptile and amphibian people. I mean, these are parts of food chains, all right? So who are they eating? Who's eating them? It just, everything's tied together. So I think a lot of us have a lot of interest. So the talk, or the lecture series, which will I'd be offering this semester, starts with microbes. And with all of these, I'd like to just kind of not only mention what's here and now in the present in Orange County, but also how it got here, the fossil history. So, in all of these, that'll be a theme. So fish. So we'll talk about fish of Orange County, but also how did fish get here? What were the first fish like, et cetera? Reptiles of Orange County. How did reptiles get here? So winter wildlife next week, 2 weeks on invertebrates. They were the first animals to local invertebrates, mollusks and the like. Then a second week just on insects, fish, amphibians, bird evolution, and bald eagle nesting in mid-March, which once again, that should be around the time that we start seeing, eagle nests active, that there are parents sitting on eggs, et cetera. So it's an exciting time to be in Orange County. Migratory waterfowl, reptiles, plants, fungi, and their fossil history, mammals, spring bird migration, ending with human evolution. And at the end of class, if anyone wants, or class, I apologize. You know, worse of habit. We have a bunch of skulls out that will come out again at the end of the semester, but we have some hominid skulls in the back, some cave bears and the like. Feel free to look. And then finally, dealing with climate change and everything, just all of the changes which are going on, including a walk up a stairway, this stairway here, which I've tried to make into more or less a museum type of environment where you explore life as it gradually unfolded. So that's our schedule for this semester. If you're unable to make these, I will record all of these as long as I remember. And like I said, I think we have more than 1,000 views last I checked. So if you're unable to make one, I mean, cars stuck in ice or, or ice in your driveway or whatever, but you're interested, then we'll record it. Hopefully you can see this. So I'm ready to talk about microbes, but if anyone else had any quick things you'd want to say, whether about MERNs, or if Dorothy, you had some announcements you said, I'd be happy to step aside while
you want me to speak into that?
I asked them to look at this, and so I'm not quite sure where I think this is the one place we know sound is good. From there, I'm not quite sure. I did plug this in, but that seemed to wipe. So plugging in something to hear you better, I think makes me not hear them at all.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that
if
means.
anyone would like, all right, pleasure. If anyone says, I love those environmental organizations so much, I'd love to maybe give a small donation. Feel free to take a calendar from either Orange County Audubon or the National Land Association. Both, if you wanted to join, we have applications as well. I'm sorry, Dorothy.
No, I just brought you one thing. That's
anyone, I apologize, would love a copy of the lecture series here. Feel free to take one of you on the way out. Whatever, we're all coming to you.
okay. I do have the same copy of the series plus a couple of other things. And unfortunately, with the original that has just come out, the time of the lectures was omitted, but I've added that, and that will be repeated every time you get something from the eBlast if you're on that list, certainly on the website as well. So we hope that you will be coming to these either live and in person or through Zoom. Absolutely put May 5th on your calendar and be here. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dorothy Schaff. I'm the Cultural Affairs Coordinator. And May 5th culminates with the Stairway of Time. And it is absolutely fabulous. This man is terrific. And every year he adds to this, as well as the walkway that gets you there. So you have to make sure that you come to that. I can't tell you how exciting it is. It's wonderful. I do want to mention, if anybody is interested in children's theater, this Sunday is the Paper Bag Players. This is their 66th anniversary of performing. My sons, who were in their 50s, went to performances when they were an early company. And so this is just, they're very creative, and there's always a lesson to be learned and lots of fun and dancing and singing. So if you have children, or if you just like live theater, you'll enjoy yourself in our theater in Orange Hall. And the performance starts at 2 o'clock. It's an hour. We also have the last showing of the Northeast Watercolor Society that is up, and it's being carded. And we have the demonstrator masterclass person, Marilyn Rose, who has her own separate solo show. That's at Orange Hall Gallery. So I hope that you will stop in for that. And there's plenty of materials there about the reception and the demonstration. And also we have a masterclass scheduled for March 6th. There's also a small exhibit in the Mindy Ross Gallery in Newburgh. So I hope that you will consider seeing that. And also, please keep your eye on the Cultural Affairs website, because we have more and more listings coming up, including Megumi is our pianist for the Hudson Valley Jazz Women performance on March 28th to celebrate Women's History Month. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Khan.
I'm glad you got here after the music because you would have been offended. Okay. So welcome everyone. So in the time that allows, and 6:30 is almost my, like, I turn into a pumpkin at that time. There's some late cells I have to run. Can we fill up this much time talking about microscopic things? And the answer is, it's just not enough. All right, so we'll try to hit the highlights, and hopefully you leave here and say, wow, there's just so much more to these things. First off, if I'm a biologist, we study life. All right, so let's talk about life. Let's just take, I don't know, a milliliter of water from like a wetland in our area. All right, so milliliter water, this big, and say, I don't see anything. Is there anything alive in there? Well, you could find 4 billion viruses and 300 million bacteria in that milliliter. And you say, wow, like the waters of New York must be super like microby, because I'll bet you nowhere else on Earth has that. And that's not true. If you go to Antarctica, all right, once again, you're in ice, you'd think you'd find nothing alive. Nope, just millions of things per milliliter, and this goes on and on. Just so you know, this is the quick version, as you might get. And if you say, I'd love the slow version, I'll record this, and at some point I'll have like, here's where you can find the playlist of these lectures. But I have a YouTube channel at Dr. Jahn 41, DRJAHN 41, and all of these movies are from there. So if you wanted to say, oh, I'd like to cruise at my leisure at a more leisurely pace, you would be welcome to. So there's so many of them. And you might say, all right, yeah, okay, but they're so small, so who really cares? Well, like, just all right. I look in the mirror, and I'm sure I do what you do. Like I'm sure, kind of like, what a fine bunch of human cells looking back at me. But the answer is they're outnumbered. So the package of what you see in the mirror, your human cells are not the majority of the cells. The number of bacterial cells that you carry around with you outnumber your human cells. And not just outnumber you, it's by how much. The early estimates were 10 to 1. That's probably too high. But nevertheless, just the fact that what you call you, that's more bacteria than human cells. Yeah, they're small. All right. They're all over your skin. The majority of them are in your large intestine. So we live with them. All right. So, as we talk about microbes, please don't think, as this is being something foreign. Like, we're a team. You carry them around, pounds of them every day, and they contribute to your health, as we'll get to later. Now, how much? All right. Well, if we were to weigh, all right, we know there's a lot, but they're small. Let's weigh them. All right. So, like, weigh all the animals on Earth. All the animals on Earth, they weigh this much. In the second part of the class, I'd like to give a shout out to the microscopic life, which has nuclei. So bigger cells, not bacteria. They're still largely microscopic life. We'll call them the protists. So protists, that's the second kind of group, they outweigh the animals. All right. So when we talk about life on Earth, if I were to say, tell me about life on Earth, I'm sure you'd say, like, oh, where there's people, there's dogs, there's cats, there's whatever. Well, the protists outweigh us. I mean, in addition to far more cells, not in addition to more cells, just the weight of them. Protists outweigh us. Here's one kind of bacteria called the archaea. Well, they outweigh all of the animals combined. Fungi, that's a part of another lecture later on. Here's the other kind of bacteria. So you put this type of bacteria together with that bacteria, and if you ask, what is life on Earth? All right, well, we like to think about we humans first and animals next, and then like maybe get to the bacteria. But clearly, in terms of number of cells, I mean, they're the majority just of what you look in the mirror, let alone on the planet. But they're also almost the majority when it comes to weight. Now, plants, if we threw plants in there, plants are really heavy. So, all right, so plants weigh a lot. They're part of another lecture here. Not only are there lots of these cells, not only are they like making up so much of the mass of or you know what, I'm sorry. I'm just going to jump crazily here and there because I keep changing. Oh, I have so many videos, like finding the ones as I jump around. All right. So one last thing about where they are. I struggle with this. All right. So if we were to ask, tell me about life on Earth, I'll tell you what I would say. I would say, all right, well, there's us, right? There's the trees, all right? There's the birds, there's the, like, this is life on Earth. But if you ask bacteria, how far down do they go? The answer is like, if you were to like go under the rocks under the ocean, they go down as far as we have dug. All right. So if you say, all right, well, let's now think about life on Earth and include, a couple miles under the ocean in rocks. Now they're weird living things. Like we don't know, maybe they divide once every century or two. Like life in that state is different, but it's life. If you were to put that on a scale, I don't think it outweighs what we see on the surface, but some have estimated that it might. So once again, when I think of life on Earth, I have a bias. I think about life where I am. Life goes much more deeper than us. So you're in coal deposits, you're where there's geothermal activity, there's life there. And because there's just so much stuff, if you're going miles under the ocean, when we think about life on Earth, we might be the minority. Just as when you look in the mirror, your cells are actually the minority. They're the majority. So this is truly an amazing group. Plus the fact that if you were to take all the living things, here's all these like different kinds of living things, let's put them in history. All right. So in history, where do we find you? Well, we just jump ahead, we squish everyone into the part. Notice that there is this black period where our planet is dead. All right. There was nothing alive here. We were a dead rock in space for a while. We can see that because there's no fossils. But even if you don't have fossils, living things make molecules that only living things make. So you could, even if you didn't find fossils, you could find in the sediments traces of them. And you could even identify, ooh, that's a bacteria. That's this kind of bacteria, a methanogen. That's a blue-green alga. Like you can tell that things were alive and you can even tell what kinds of things. For a long time, almost a billion years, our planet is dead. And then we're alive. Planet Earth has life. And you say, that's great. Trees and forests and bugs and no. Planet Earth has bacteria in that red zone. A third of the history of life is bacteria only. So our planet was alive because of the bacteria on it for 1.5 billion years. Nothing else. We don't get more complex cells with nuclei, et cetera, till the green. We don't get animals to the yellow. So they're also the first living things. Now, you might not say, well, like, who cares? Like, just did anything exciting happen there after all? Well, once again, there's each of these is just like a story to be told, and this is the quick synopsis. I'm going to be really egocentric right now. I like myself, and I am impressed by myself. So, for example, my red blood cells have hemoglobin that binds oxygen. Yeah, well, bacteria invented globins. All right. My cells have a phospholipid membrane with cholesterol, and that's what makes up the cell membrane. Yeah, bacteria invented that. Like my genetic code is a language where UUU stands for a specific amino acid, phenylalanine. Yeah, the bacteria invented that. I like use these proteins called G protein coupled receptors. I use it when I think for like my pleasure center of my brain, the dopamine receptors. I use it as opsins to detect light. Bacteria invented those. And I could go on. So our complex body is built of all of these parts that date back to this red period. So if you say, what was going on there? Was there human muscle? No. But the way that we get energy using oxygen out of foodstuffs, that was invented in the red zone. All right, our DNA, our genetic code was invented in the red zone. The complex living things would build on that later. So these are really, really important living things. Now, I'm going to try to sum up, most of life's, cells in very quickly. So the one thing I want to say is, well, they're small and they're simple. See, like there's an animal cell, there's a plant cell, there's a bacterial cell. Look, small, simple, doesn't have a nucleus, doesn't have membrane-bound organelles, and I'm ready to go on. Small and simple. However, you can't generalize. Just like an animal. What is an animal? Well, there are animals which are microscopic. There are animals which are blue whales. Like if you're just like, here's an animal, obviously you're not representing the whole group simply. Same thing here. What's a bacteria? Well, some of them, they're tiny, right? Some of them are like a millionth of a meter, all right, or a thousandth of a millimeter is a micron. So here's E. coli that lives in your gut. It's maybe 1 micron wide and 2 microns long. Streptococcus might be just like a little ball that's 1 micron wide. All right, so yeah, those are average sizes. Let me depict them here. But some bacteria are much larger. So if that's Streptococcus, let's say, here are these. There are some which are smaller. All right, so this one's smaller than E. coli. If that's E. coli there. This one's weird. It's square shaped. That's an odd shape to have, but notice how much bigger it is. This one's bigger. This one's bigger still. This one's almost big enough to see without a microscope. All right. So just like animals come in a variety of sizes, from a tiny microscopic worm to a blue whale, bacteria do as well. They have all kinds of shapes. Some are rod shaped, some are round, some are wavy, a little bit wavy. Some are called spirochetes, like Lyme's disease is caused by one that's really wavy. Their cell walls can vary. Some don't have cell walls. And once again, if I were teaching this in a class, I would love to spend 2 hours talking about bacteria. Just they vary in so many things, and it's nice to say, oh, your average bacterium is like this, and that's useful. But there's so much more diversity to them. Let me just give you a couple of examples. One is the archaea. You may remember that I had two groups of bacteria that are completely unrelated. Completely unrelated. I mean, like as deep as the branches of life goes, that's when these things separate. So these are bacteria called archaea, which is different from the ones that are mostly living, make up most of the ones which live in you. Archaea are weird in so many ways. We could talk about their cell membrane lipids, and if anyone's interested, like there's all of these reasons to say that they're weird. Their cell walls are weird. But here, this is largely true. I'm going to, qualify. But if you were to go to an area that's volcanically active, like Iceland, okay, this place stinks. It's ugly. Like you just have geothermal activity. Yellowstone would be like this. All right. And you might say oh, what could live here? And then you'd say, wait, like, especially some of the colors here, there are living things here. Now, I'm sure you have problems. I'm sure your life is hard. But maybe you would look at them and say, wait, it's trying to live in boiling acid. Like, I thought my life was hard. And like maybe you take pity on it and you say, let me gather it and I'll take it back to my warm, nice home. I'll take pity on this thing that lives in such a harsh environment. And you would find that it dies. Not only does it live in boiling acid, it needs to live in boiling acid. It would die in the conditions that you find hospitable. Now, there are some normal bacteria, we call them the eubacteria, that this is true of. But the archaea, a lot of them are the extreme ones. They really like deep pressures, areas without oxygen. They like high temperatures and just things that look really inhospitable. And if you're ever in an area that's like volcanic or, like Yellowstone or Iceland, you could find these. So that's just weird. Oh, there was my video. I'm sorry. Yeah, here was that video I was looking for called the deep biosphere. Just the question of like, how deep does life go? And you would say nothing can live down there. The pressure's too great. Like the temperature's too high. And then you remember, oh wait, some of these, they love high pressure that would kill you and me. They die at ours. They love high temperatures. They would die at ours. And if you were to say, that's just kind of weird. Well, it is. But if you were to say, let's take a molecule and that all living things share, like something that has to do with DNA, like RNA genes or something. So here's something that all living things share. And let's just compare and say, all right, me, the monkey, the tree, the fungus, this bacteria, that bacteria, how similar are these molecules? And you build a family tree based on similarities. All of the things with nuclei are here. The animals would all be here. The fungi would be there. The plants would be here. Here are those things which have nuclei. These would be the bacteria. But notice there's two groups of the bacteria, the weird archaea, then the eubacteria, the true ones. But I'm going to highlight in red all of the things. Oh, I swear I do. It's here somewhere. all of the things that like super high temperatures, that need high temperatures. And if you were to make a family tree, oh, it's here. There we go. It's at the base. So all the things that love really hot temperatures seem to be like right at the base of the family tree. And then we realize, oh, of course, this is not how Earth started. Ah, look, a relatively mild winter compared to what we were used to when we were growing up. Like, oh, it's not boiling. Oh, there's oxygen in the air to breathe. There's all these nice, like these things. That's not how the planet started. All right. And the oldest branches of life on Earth, like really to us extreme environments, because that's what the Earth was like. So we think it's weird that they live in such inhospitable things, but they evolved when that was the planet. All right. And so they're normal in that sense. We're the ones who have changed. So we could go on and on. Just one last thing about the archaea before we go on. Like, who studies these things? So scientists, they sometimes study like weird things. Like there are there are scientists studying like how much cow flatulence is there in the world, and just why are they doing that? Well, two things. One, I'm mentioning flatulence because if an organism is producing methane, all right, and that happens in swamps, it happens in intestines, whether it be cow intestines or yours, there are things that produce methane. They are definitely archaea. Archaea, that the weirder bacteria, they're the only ones who can do that. All right. And methane absorbs an awful lot of heat in the atmosphere, more than 30 times the amount of carbon dioxide. So if you're trying to measure how much climate change or what's contributing to climate change, as we get more and more cows, we wonder how much methane are these cows producing. So the archaea bacteria living in the intestines of the cows are a factor we have to weigh in when we're trying to see where climate change is going. So these are not these weird things that only people, um, doing these, nerdy science, things are interested in. No, like how's the planet going, and like what's living in my intestines? We end up, with some of these topics. All right. So just a really quick run through. Uh, Bacteria can move, so they can have flagella. In fact, the archaea, they have completely different flagella than the eukaryote has. So flagella have appeared 3 different times. Yes, we use the same word for them, but they're 3 different things depending on whether they're in like, animals like human sperm, that's the only cells which have flagella, or in bacteria or the archaea, 3 completely different structures. But here you can see they move. All right, so bacteria can move. Um, if I got the sense that you were super, super like into chemistry, everything I'm about to say would be a much longer talk, but we'll just do the super synopsis. If you want to know like what's their deal, like what's going on, just life does share some stuff. We all need energy, all right, and we all need biomolecules. And then just a common theme to ask is, well, how do living things get their energy? How do living things get their biomolecules? Well, and then we go on. So photosynthesis, bacteria invented it. All right. In fact, there are these purple photosynthetic bacteria. We could go into that. So you can get energy from the sun. All right. And you can be a photoheterotroph or a photoautotroph. Now, I know you're thinking, I don't care about this at all, but the term heterotroph versus autotroph is important because the question is, where do you get your carbon? Right? Plants can suck carbon out of the air, all right, and rearrange it to make sugar and protein, et cetera. But you can't. You have to eat someone else who had carbon. All this carbon stuff came from me eating things that had carbon. So whether it was bananas or chickens or whatever, I ate things that had carbon for carbohydrates, proteins, and the like. And that's how I got it. All right. I can't suck it out of the air and turn it into a biomolecule. Plants can, but bacteria did it first. So bacteria, they were the original autotrophs, which took carbon from the non-living world and then made it into protein and lipids, et cetera. So there are bacteria that can make carbon into biomolecules, and then other bacteria that can't, and then have to eat the living or dead versions of these guys to get theirs. All right, so I'm a heterotroph. Some bacteria are as well. And that applies to nitrogen too. All right, so I need nitrogen for my DNA, for my protein. And you say, well, then just take some from the air, right? I mean, because the air, oh, it's like 79% nitrogen. And then you realize, well, no, that nitrogen is joined by a bond that you can't break. If I was dying for lack of nitrogen, so I couldn't make protein or DNA, and I breathe in 79% nitrogen, I can't use what I just inhaled to make the molecules I need to live. I would die, okay? I need things that can take nitrogen out of the air and turn it into molecules that living things can use. Only bacteria do that. So no plant, no animal would have DNA, would have protein, if it weren't for bacteria taking nitrogen out of the air to then go into the amino acids of the proteins and the nitrogenous bases of the DNA and RNA. So I hate to say, like, when I think about life on Earth, and once again, I apologize, I'm egotistical. Like, I think, well, there's me and us. Like, we're the important ones, and these bacteria, like, do we really have to talk about them? When the reality is, the planet needs them, not me so much. All right, the planet would be fine without me, not without them. There would be no DNA, there would be no protein, there would be no biomolecules if it weren't for these various types of bacteria. Now, we could go on and on into, their lifestyles, et cetera. One of the interesting things I found, there are bacteria hunters. All right, so bacteria, they can decompose dead stuff. They can cause disease, they can do photosynthesis, but they can also hunt. So here's a bacteria saying, ooh, look at all these prey around me. I'm going to release these enzymes, kill all these things, burst them, and then suck up all their good stuff. So it's a hunter. Here's a bacteria that says, oh, I found a bigger cell. I'm going to like go up to it, make a hole in it, invade it, and just suck up all its stuff. All right. So perforates this, and now it has killed this. All right. So there are bacteria hunters. And the two of my favorites are, so a coccus is a round cell. This one's called vampirococcus because it just gets next to a bigger cell, makes little holes and sucks out its stuff. And then there's a bacteria could have a comma shape that's called a vibrio. There's called vampirovibrio. So there's vampire round one and vampire comma one that just like suck up the stuff here. So bacteria have all of these lifestyles. There's a song, which some of you heard coming in, but we have too many things to say. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so if I'm embarrassing you, I apologize. Has anyone thanked a blue-green alga today? Okay. No. All right, well, maybe on your way home, you'll rethink this. And maybe, so anyway, here's the goal. I want you to see blue-green algae in a new way. Now, blue-green algae, that's a lousy name. They're not really algae. They're bacteria. So they do photosynthesis, but these are bacteria. So we'll talk about the real algae, in just a few minutes. So the cyanobacteria, they are green. They do photosynthesis, and they release oxygen as a waste. Okay. Forgive me, I'm just looking to see who's excited. I'm going to just look at all the people online to see who's turned on your cameras to show excitement. No one. All right. So you're thinking, hey, come on. So it doesn't everything. I mean, plants are green. They do photosynthesis and they release oxygen as a waste. Yeah, because plant cells have their descendants living inside them. All right, so we'll get to that. All right, so this is an important group. And just, again, I think you'll rethink this. If we could split Earth's history, its 4.5 billion year history, into two halves, this is how I would do it. I would break it into this half, where in red, there's no oxygen in the atmosphere. And this half where there is. All right, it starts off low and it starts building up and up. So our planet has kind of like two halves, no oxygen, oxygen. All right. Now we can tell there's no oxygen because nothing rusted. You find iron, you find all of these other metals in their reduced form, not their oxidized form. Like you would never have these elemental metals today in a rock sediment forming because they would rust, all right? So you can tell that there's no oxygen in the air. So if you say, all right, we go from a planet where there's no oxygen to a planet where there is, how'd that happen? What happens where the line is? And the answer is, that's when the blue-green algae first appeared, the cyanobacteria. There had been bacterial photosynthesis before, the purple guys, but they did not release oxygen as a waste. The green ones did. So the cyanobacteria, they change our planet. And, like we can get to this later in the lecture series. We living things, we're messing with the gases in the atmosphere, and that's probably going to change climate. We're not the first ones to do that, all right? Because if you take, all right, reduced things out of the atmosphere, like methane that absorbs a lot of heat, and replace it with carbon dioxide that only absorbs a little bit of heat, all right, then those living things messed with the gases of the atmosphere. And that had an effect on climate. In fact, there were ice ages so severe that we think most, if not all, of the oceans froze in the late Neoproterozoic. And it was their fault, these living things, and the stuff they did messed with the gases that absorb heat in the atmosphere. All right. But these blue-green algae, they're just amazing. All right. So here are some of them, and we find them in association with living things. So here they can be in lichens. Now, a lot of times it's green algae, but sometimes it can be the bacteria, the blue-green algae. You can find them in some some sponges and the like. But if you were to look inside a plant, and you're saying, look, green plant that does photosynthesis releases oxygen as a waste. Why do you do that? Look inside the plant cells. You will see most of the plant cell isn't green. Most of the cell isn't doing photosynthesis. It's these blobs called chloroplasts. That's where the photosynthesis happens. And as I'll get to this again later, but I started my sentence, so I might as well finish it. If you were to say, oh, all right, if I were to look inside a plant cell and find these green blobs, what strikes me as funny? Well, they're the size of bacteria. They're the shape of bacteria. They divide like by binary fission, like bacteria, not like the mitosis, like the nucleus does. They have a circular chromosome, like bacteria. Their genes are similar. Like, so for example, you can have a lot of people speaking English, but you can tell, you're from Australia. I can tell by your accent. You're from Jamaica. I can tell by your accent. You're from Scotland. I can tell by your accent. DNA is like that. All right, there are words that's bacteria accent for DNA. Chloroplasts and the mitochondria in your cells speak with bacteria accents, all right, rather than the accent which the nucleus uses. The antibiotics that kill bacteria kill chloroplasts. I could go on. Those plants are green because the first green things, the cyanobacteria, live inside them as their chloroplasts. All right, so they revolutionized the planet. And going back to how heavy things were, I showed you like, the bacteria are heavy, but the plants were even more so. Obviously, plants owe their photosynthesis to the bacteria descendants living inside them. So, bacteria just amazing. We are certainly interested in the diseases that they cause, but there's so much more. Most bacteria will never cause disease. In fact, we have specific populations of them, living in our nasal cavity, our oral cavity, over our skin. So we call it like the flora of the nasal cavity, the flora of the oral cavity, etc. The flora of the intestines, and more and more as we study them, we say if you take infants and you look at the species which are in its large intestine, its microbiome, this set is more associated with a colicky infant. This set is more associated with an increased predisposition to type 2 diabetes. This set is more associated with this one. So we're interacting with them. Like our health is in part our forming team with those. So yes, we worry about the ones which are causing strep throat, etc. But they're giving us the biomolecules which we use. They're decomposing all of the dead stuff. You can find them in living things. If you go inside plant roots, many of the plant roots, so this is a rhizobium thing, So if you look at legumes, do you have to fertilize them with expensive nitrogen fertilizers? The answer is no. Why not? Look at their roots. You see all the little dots? Those are bacteria. So the bacteria are getting the nitrogen for the plant, and then the plant does photosynthesis and feeds the bacteria. All right, so we are surrounded by symbiosis, teamwork. All right, where the bacteria are working with us, we're working with them. All right, and so life on Earth, is in large part thanks to, them, the things they do, and how they cooperate with us. I would love to go on. We got to move on, right? Because um, right after oxygen goes into the air, all right, so the cyanobacteria start putting oxygen in the air. All of a sudden, something new occurs on our planet. Prior to this, in the red section, there are two types of cell, the eubacteria and the archaea. Two types of cell live on planet Earth. But get to that line, three. A third type of cell appears, all right? It's bigger, more complex, and all right, almost always, I'll hedge that in a second, depends on oxygen. So obviously, after oxygen starts to come into the air, thanks to those cyanobacteria, a new type of cell appears that depends on oxygen. All right, that makes sense. Protist is a lousy word, but let's use it. Let's talk about these protists, these larger
eukaryotic cells.
microscopic cells. So in general, they are larger. I hate to say that because there are very small eukaryotes and very big bacteria. So there's an overlap. There are bacteria that are bigger than some eukaryotes. But in general, eukaryotic cells are larger. In fact, I mean, there are eukaryotes you can see by the naked eye. Like we'll use them later in our lab. You're like, ooh, is that a little worm? No, that's a really long paramecium relative, like 3 millimeters long. So there are worms, which are animals, which you can't see without a microscope. And there are one-celled protists, which you can see with your naked eye. So just like animals can go from like tiny little bugs to blue whales, these microscopic groups, it's not one size, they're all this big. All right. So we have some of these which are bigger. And in general, so I have a series of videos talking about how we think this happened. I have a song on eukaryogenesis, which I don't know if anyone has ever listened to. But in general, how did this happen? And it's a fascinating story. And there's all of these little footprints where we think these are the bacteria that seem to be related to the nucleus. So what would become the nucleus of the bigger, more complex cells? These bacteria. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just crazy. These are just the big ones that you just saw. I'm sorry they went away. I'll find them again. We'll get to them. Oh, I'm sorry. But we could actually try to retrace the steps that we think that there was just like two bacteria and then there got to be a eukaryotic cell. But what we think happened was that one ended up inside the other. All right. So that you have cells living within inside other cells. Now that sounds crazy, but then you say, oh wait, no, cells live inside the plant roots. All right. Cells live inside here. There are salamanders in our area that are a little greenish because they have a green algae living inside the animal cells. Corals, which I'll get to in a second, that's how they live. So cells can live inside other cells. So it happens today. And we think that's how the nucleus started. And we could go through, here's the evidence for that. We think that's how the mitochondria started. Your mitochondria, which are in all your cells, right? Once again, not to be boring, but your mitochondria are the size of bacteria. They're the shape of bacteria. They divide like bacteria. They have a circular chromosome. I lie to my students all the time. I say humans have 46 chromosomes. I'm sure you've heard that. Humans have 46 chromosomes. It's a lie. You have 47, and even that's a lie. Because you have 46 in your nucleus. All right, let's say that's the purple thing. See the bluish things? Those are mitochondria. You have a chromosome there. So you have mitochondrial chromosomes outside your nuclear chromosomes. Now, it looks like bacterial chromosomes. It's a circle rather than the rod-shaped ones you have in your nucleus. Now, you might say, yeah, but who cares? It's so small. True, it is really small. But a big cell can have 1 million mitochondria. So you have 46 big chromosomes in your nucleus. But even though the mitochondrial chromosomes are small, you got 1 million of them. That's a lot of DNA. And we care, like some people have genetic illnesses because of mutations on their nuclear genes. Some people have genetic illnesses because of mutations in the bacterial ones. Some people have cancer because of mutations in the mitochondria. So mitochondria seem to be the descendants of bacteria that learned to live inside bigger cells and cooperate. All right. So when you eat food, almost all the food you've ever eaten has gone to them. The oxygen that you breathe goes to them, and they use that oxygen to break down your food to give you the ATP molecules which have powered your life. So the energy molecules which have served as your batteries come from them. They help prevent cancer. That's why mutations in them can actually be cause of cancer, because they stop cancer unless they break. All right. So these bigger cells, they seem to be a team. We're like cells living inside other cells for mutual benefit. And the plants are eukaryotes, the fungi are eukaryotes, we animals are eukaryotes, so are all of the things that I'm about to go through. So this was a revolution for our planet, a third type of cell. And when we talk about the algae, the plants, the fungi, the animals, obviously quite successful. Whole lots of things go on here. I just want to kind of introduce you to some of the basics. If you want to make, biologists pretty angry, you could ask them, let's not use the term protist. Let's make a family tree of these one-celled organisms and like come up with real good biological names to make all of the branches. And then the biologists, they start to fight with each other. You'll see why in just a second. And then the names that they come up with, like, I'm a teacher, I don't want to say them in class, my students don't want to learn them. So like, just call all of them protists. We know it's a lousy name. We know it's like, we say this is what we don't want to do, and then we do it. Like, just call them protists. But otherwise we'd be saying you're an excavate and you're a dichristate and you're a heterocon, and like, oh, well, my students would hate the class more than they already do. So just call them protists, and just, an hour later we'll be all done. But if the family tree looks like this, what can we learn? Well, one of them is at the base of the family tree, there's this thing. Now, I like to think that I talk about this because it's important, but this is Giardia. I lived abroad for a couple of years while I was in the Peace Corps. Giardia lived inside me for 2 years. So maybe that's why you're hearing about it. Maybe it's not important, but I build a bond and I just can't shake it. But in any case, so Giardia is one of the main reasons that we treat water, all right, because otherwise we'd all have Giardia. It's one of the reasons you shouldn't drink from like pristine mountain streams, because beavers are defecating in the water and they can have Giardia. So even if there's not pollution, you can still get sick from this. So it's an intestinal illness. So I could tell you stories. So like if I had Giardia now, I might say, "Ooh, excuse me," and I might burp, and the back table would be like, "Oh, what was that?" So like it's true anyway, but those days are gone. But they're kind of interesting because being so low in the family tree, they don't have sex, but they have some genes for sex. They don't have mitochondria, but they seem to have what's a pre-mitochondria. They seem to show us like what life might have been like early in that transition to be that complex cell thing. And so they're fascinating. All right. But then there's so many other ones. And this is just, there's so many types of microscopic life. So what I hope to do, let's say in 10 minutes or less, just introduce you to all of these things. So some things which we call algae move. So we call these a group of algae, the Euglena, but as you see, they have flagella, just, the way human sperm would have flagella, and they're swimming along just fine. All right, and they're in ponds like like you can get Euglena right in the pond out here. They're swimming around and doing photosynthesis, and you say, "Oh, that's nice that they're doing photosynthesis. That's such a productive way to live." Well, they could eat other living things too. Like in our heads, we make boxes. You're like a plant-like photosynthetic thing, or you're eating other organisms. You can do both. So you can like go around, I'll eat the bacteria that I can find, but also get energy when the sun, when I can. There's that. And actually like that image, I don't know if you can make it out super well, but if you look at the green things, notice that it's not the whole cell isn't green, it's like these green blobs. They have chloroplasts here. So they are photosynthetic because they have little photosynthetic microbes that learn to live inside bigger cells. All right. Now, most of them don't look like that. Most of them look like this, and you're like, "Oh, it's such a pretty picture." It is, right? You got pretty human red blood cells. You got pretty little purpley things waving around, and then you realize, ooh, they're not supposed to be there. Okay. So that's a disease-causing organism. So this is a big group. All right. So when you think about like arthropods, what are arthropods? Well, you've got like big horseshoe crabs, you've got tiny little zooplankton, you've got this bug, you've got like arthropods are a big group. So are the euglenozoans. Some are photosynthetic, some are disease causers, where they cause Chagas disease in Latin America. They cause sleeping sickness in Africa. Here you see them swimming in human blood. And most of them look like this. So when this group started, they weren't green and photosynthetic. That's only a couple of them, one of the offshoots. That's why it's so hard to classify these guys, because here you have how they started off, and they've got genes. But then somewhere along the way, they took on another cell inside them that did photosynthesis, which brought its genes. So if you're going to try to do a family tree, you're like, ooh, let's compare genes and see who's more like. Once you have things that like then took in other organisms, whose genes are you looking at? All right, because yeah, these guys are more closely related to these guys, but if they take in some of these guys, the green alga, now they've got their genes. You try to build a family tree, it's easy just to go crazy and to say like, oh, my family tree is different from yours. So that's one of the reasons that biologists will be arguing about this forever. But we go on, because one of the things that eukaryotes did was they got a new type of cytoskeleton, all right? One that's flexible. Now here's an amoeba moving, but I like watching these because your white blood cells move like this. I'm a eukaryote like them. I have a nucleus like them. I have mitochondria like them. My white blood cells move like that. So like I share traits with bacteria, but I share more traits with those. Right? It's kind of like in the family tree of humanity, we're all related, but you're related to some people more than others. You and your cousins share stuff that you don't share with me. In the same way, me and this amoeba share stuff that we don't share with the bacteria. And one of the ways is here the way our cell skeleton is organized. My white blood cells can do that. They can do that. The bacteria can't. They're moving in a funny way. They're essentially disassembling their skeleton behind them and reassembling it in front of them and flowing into it. And that allows them to kind of like surround the little things that they want to eat, like these paramecia. This next one, I like it, maybe just because of its cool name. But if you want, it's called Chaos. That's its genus species name. But it's an amoeba big enough to see without a microscope. All right, so once again, there are animals that are too small to see without a microscope. Here's a one-celled amoeba that can eat those microscopic animals. Animals eat microbes, not always. Some of the microbes are a lot bigger than the animals are. So here's an amoeba, which is just absolutely huge. Some of the ciliates are huge. So here's another way that they can move. All right, so they can move by having a flagella. You saw that in euglena. You can move through amoeboid motion. All right, or you could cover yourself with cilia and move that way. What are ciliates like? Well, they're a phylum, biologically speaking. And the first part of the video was trying to say arthropods are, but like when you compare this crab to that bug, there's a huge difference. Same thing here. Not all the ciliates are going to be the same. Just as arthropods are a big diverse group, so are the ciliates. Some are big enough to see without a microscope. They're covered in these little tiny hairs called cilia, which they can use to move along and swim. Some move it differently. Some will just kind of plant themselves and move the medium around them. So you could swim in a media, or you could stay still and move the media. And I love watching them just because they're so cool. But then again, I think of myself. I have cilia. My trachea, my throat, is lined by cilia. The oviduct is lined by cilia. We eukaryotes have cilia. That's something that we share that no bacteria does. All right, so we share these features. And looking at the cilia all waving, you're doing that right now in your throat. Mucus traps little gunk out of the air, and you sweep it away from your lungs. That little brown thing coming in on the side, you might think, oh, is that like a little worm? No, that's a cell. It looks like a worm. It's bigger than many of the nematode worms. All right, so this is a one-celled ciliate. It's a cell swimming with cilia that is larger than many of the nematode worms. Now, slugs are okay. I guess I have to I like snails. Snails are awesome because like we get the seashells, the conch shells, etc. Oh, like you collect, you go to the seashore, you say, look at this cool shell. You love the snails, but slugs, like it's the same animal. All right, but one makes like a home for itself, and the home is pretty. Cells can do that. Cells can put little hard homes around them. All right. And this is great for fossils because this fossilizes. So when this is in the fossil record, you can say, ooh, we've got hard remnants of microbes. So there are things called foraminiferins making calcium carbonate. There are things which use silica and or look glassy called radiolarians, doing the same thing. So they're kind of cool, for the fossil record because now we can trace them a little bit better. But then just these pop up in weird places. Like, so for example, you might say like, oh, spring break, I want to go to this Caribbean beach has like these pink sand beaches. No, they don't. It's not sand. It's them. All right. There's so many of these hard microscopic cases. That's what the beach is made of. You're walking on the foraminiferins. So there's a lot of these. There's more. All right. So for example, there are diatoms. Now, diatoms, they have another way of moving. So just showing you how diverse movement can be. They just kind of secrete a mucus and then slide along it. All right, so that's a new kind of movement which we haven't seen. Not all of them can do that. This is a kind of algae, but notice it's not the regular colors. This is kind of like a golden brown, all right, because of what's called fucoxanthin. All right, there it is, moving. Now I'm going to leave and go on, but I just like to just say one thing. I care about life on Earth. I care about oxygen going in the atmosphere. I care about storing and sequestering carbon to help fight carbon change, climate change. That's why I like the rainforest. The rainforests do a lot of that. Photosynthesis, tying up carbon, putting oxygen in the air. Diatoms do as much as the rainforests. All right, they're mostly in the ocean. We rarely think about them. All right, but obviously that's important. And climate change is probably going to screw them up. They like colder water. As the ocean water gets warmer, that's probably going to slow them down. So we rely on them, and our activities are kind of messing them up a little bit. So diatoms, a group to watch. There is another weird group. I think they are weird. Called the dinoflagellates. They're weird for so many reasons. How would you hear about these? Well, uh, I wish so. They're weird in a couple of reasons. If you've ever heard about red tides, don't go swimming in Florida because it's a red tide, you could die. Don't eat shellfish that was caught during a red tide because there's a neurotoxin and you could die. The red is them. They're a type of alga. They've got these reddish pigments. That's them. I I almost had a great video to show you because I went to Puerto Rico and tried to book I'd like a midnight kayak thing where I can go in this bioluminescent thing where you put your paddle of the kayak down and it turns like this fluorescent blue. Although, sorry, I didn't know at the time, you never book it during the full moon because then they just cancel it and they're like, well, you can't see it during the full moon. So I don't have a video of it. But if you go to Puerto Rico or many of the other places to see bioluminescent microbes, it's them. They release this blue light when disturbed. We have to go on, but the last thing about these guys, coral, right? Coral's an animal, but it does photosynthesis. All right, that's how it can grow and form tissues. And you're asking, how on earth can coral do photosynthesis? Well, that's because it has algae living inside the animal cells. So you look inside the animal cells, and inside you've got these dinoflagellates, which give it pigment, all right, all those little dots. That's what's doing the photosynthesis, and that's how corals grow. And about a quarter of all ocean fish spend at least part of their life cycle in the coral. This is the most diverse part of the ocean, the most important part of the marine ecosystems. And we wouldn't have it unless dinoflagellates could live inside animal cells and do photosynthesis there. All right, so dinoflagellates, most people have never heard of them, all right, other than like maybe the ick, like this thing that might cover like one of your pet fish that you have in your aquarium. If it dies covered in ick, it's likely to be a dinoflagellate. Um, ugh, there are more as we wind down. There are the algae, but there's different kinds of algae. I mean, there's green algae, all right, which I'll mention again. There are red algae, although not all of them are red. That was a greenish one that was technically a red algae. Why different colors? Because you're in the ocean. And like if you're at a different depth, not all light is getting down to deep water. You want to be red if you're deep down because you're getting more of the red wavelengths. And so we've got red algae. We've got brown algae. Now, some of you might be thinking like algae, like these little microscopic things. Do we really care? Well, brown algae can get big. Like maybe you notice that you say like, hey, I want to go to my boat in Florida, where or whatever, and I can't because there's all this gunk from the Sargasso Sea that's clogging up the marina. And you say, well, that's a brown algae. And they can be the kelps. Kelps can be like 150 feet long. So when I'm talking about protists, you're thinking these tiny microscopic things. 150 feet long, that's longer, like that's bigger than most plants, but it's a protist. All right. So there's different kinds of algae. Okay. Um, and some of them are green. Now, green algae, you can find them single celled, you can find them, in colonies with weird shaped um, chloroplasts, or you can find these multicellular colonies washing up on the Jersey shore. And as we could talk about on another day, green algae do live on land. Like if you look at the base of a tree trunk, you'll say, oh, look, the bark of the tree trunk is greenish. No, that's the algae living on the tree trunk. If you say, oh, here's a rock in the sun, it's kind of greenish. No, that's the algae living on the rock. So green algae already lives on land. And about 500 million years ago, we get the first plants, which evolved from green algae. So green algae evolved to green plants. That would be part of another lecture. There are more, and we could go back and forth. So they're what are called slime molds. They have a horrible name, but if you like peel up, bark off of a rotting tree, you'll find these beautiful, delicate branching patterns that's decomposing the dead wood. And if you were to look underneath, here's another neat way of movement. The last one, they divide their cells, so they make lots of cells, but then they don't split up the cells by they make more nuclei, but they don't make cell walls to separate them. So they're just like goop. Like, so imagine like inside me, I had all the same stuff, but not separation between the cells. I just had stuff. It would be easy for all my stuff to say, hey, let's go this way. And like, I could like bulge out this way because all my stuff's flowing up. Let's go this way. So that's kind of what they're doing. You just got all this goopy nuclei and cell stuff that decides, hey, let's go this way. Let's go that way. So this is called cytoplasmic streaming, another uh, um, thing here. Two last things very quick. There's a weird group no one's ever heard of called the choanoflagellates. Do we care? Well, in the family tree of eukaryotes, the things that have nuclei, animals are in the family tree and they have cousins which aren't animals but have some of their traits called choanoflagellates. So as all of these branches of protist life, branched out, at some point there was a branch which was leading to the animals and gave a couple of offshoots just before it got there. Choanoflagellates have some of our traits, but not enough to be animals. So that's kind of neat. Couple final quick points. I mentioned cells can live inside other cells. So here is the spotted salamander, which we very excited. I'm going to talk about spotted salamanders, and we can see them on warm, rainy spring nights here. But notice the egg masses, they're green because algae live inside the animal cells. All right, so corals do it. Salamanders can do it. All right, so cells living inside other cells, that's one of the ways that life got more complex. We can see it around us. If you wanted to study fossils, by the time we're getting big now, all right, and these cells are bigger than bacteria, a lot of them are making hard shells, there's all of these fossil things called acritarchs, which you can then study. All right, now, a lot of times we don't know what they are. Like, is that an alga? Is that a this? Is that a that? But by studying their patterns, you could say, ooh, apparently there was like a mass extinction at this point in Earth's history because all of the acritarchs that used to live there are now gone. And these ones seem to be associated with colder water, these with warmer water. You can say, ooh, it looks like the climate of the planet was changing at this point in fossil history. So a lot of geologists study these acritarchs, which are like microscopic fossil living things. Even if we're not quite sure what they are, they can still teach us a thing or two. Last thing is, when we think about sex, I think a lot of us think about well, animals and how animals have sex, and that's fair. But animals didn't invent sex. I mean, sex is essentially you have cells that have two copies of each chromosome that decide, hey, let's do something different. Let's make cells that have one copy of each chromosome. Let's have one of them be small and swimming. Let's call that a sperm. Let's make the other one big and nutrient rich. Let's call that the ovum. And when the two of them stick together, now you got two sets of all the chromosomes again. Aha, new generation. We've had sex. All right. So animals do that. But it was these microscopic protists 2 billion years ago that invented it. Animals added to it, all right, so they made gonads and courtship and glands and ducts, etc. But sexual reproduction, where you have two stages of the life cycle with different numbers of chromosomes, etc. It was these microscopic living things that invented it. So plants have sex. That's what pollination is about. Fungi have sex, but so do the algae, etc. So another reason for caring about these living things is because in the family tree of life, now forgive me, I am a little egotistical and biased. I like myself. But a lot of the things about me date to them. It's like when we study cancer and how we control cell division, the metaphase, the prophase, how this, they invented that. Bacteria didn't have that. But like the prophase, metaphase and stuff, eukaryotes have that, the nucleus. So it was these guys who invented that. The cilium, the flagellum, the nucleus, the Golgi, all these cell parts. These guys invented it. So many of the genes that I have came in early eukaryotes, genes that bacteria don't have. So one of the things, and this is me being egotistical and biased, I'm so impressed with myself that when I look at the natural world, I like to see how my form and the form of our species gradually came to be. And you can see these pieces of it were present in early living things way back when there was only bacteria, like 3 billion years ago. Here's a couple more pieces that were now in place 2 billion years ago in the early cells, which had nuclei. And in 2 weeks after winter wildlife, we'll say, all right, well, animals first appeared 700 million years ago. What were the first animals like? What were the early animals like? What, are the types of invertebrate animals that we have today? So hopefully, the last fall, like the talk series had more of a theme. We're just going to do birds. Here's bird group number 1. Next week is bird group number 2, etc. But if you look outside, even if birds are your main interest, or it may not be, there's just so much else going on there. All right. And so all of these groups are worth talking about. None of the other things would be there if it weren't for the bacteria, or just so many of the biomolecules we have come from them first. And then all these living things, they're chains. There's symbioses where they work together. There's food chains, decomposing of the dead stuff to, reuse the nutrients for the living stuff. So this series was meant to just kind of hit all of these other groups. So just a little bit about the different kinds of invertebrates. So just not to plug the invertebrates, but just for example, if you were to take all of the species we know, bacteria, plants, all of them, number them, and just say, all right, well, now let's count the flies, the beetles, the wasps, and the moths. Those 4 insect groups have more species than all the rest of life combined. So we're not going to spend, months on moths and flies, etc. But that deserves a mention. So, like as we go through these groups of living things, invertebrates have stories to tell, as do the early amphibians, the reptiles, etc. And then with human evolution and the mess we find ourselves in now, also stories worth telling. So I'd like to thank you so much for coming. Next week, we will talk about winter wildlife because believe it or not, winter is going to start waning soon. And this is a nice time of year to see stuff in the wild. And there's stuff that you can only see in winter. What was I think 2 days ago, I was out and I saw short-eared owls. I love seeing short-eared owls. Winter's the time to see them. All right, after winter, they go up north and breeding. You'll have to wait till next winter to see them. So what can you see in winter? Next Monday from 5:30 to 6:30, we'll be talking about winter wildlife. Thank you so much for coming. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to entertain it. But once again, if you had a little donation for one of these environmental organizations, feel free to take a calendar. There's a schedule of events. There's even applications for them if you'd like. If you need to go, thank you so very much for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to them as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just look online real quick. Any questions that I can help anybody with? I'm looking in the chat. Oh, chat too. I'm sorry. Dr. John, would you say that consciousness, when would you, ooh. Uh, so I'm not quite sure I would meet your level of consciousness. But then even with animals, so the question is, where does consciousness start? A lot, like the simplest thing that I know of is if you take an animal and you take a chalk and you make a mark on it, like its cheek or something, it looks in the mirror. Does it say, hey, I have a chalk mark on my cheek, I'm going to wipe it off? Or does it think it's looking at something with a chalk mark um, on its cheek? By something like that, like these primates have it, a couple of birds can have it, dolphins can have it. So like that's one definition of consciousness. I'm sure we could come up with others, and now say like these other like animals have some sort of self-awareness. I wouldn't really put it anywhere beyond the animals, and usually the higher animals. So that would be my answer to your question. Good question. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially like, so you look inside a cell, you're like, oh, there's the chloroplast, there's the mitochondria, and then you realize, wait a minute, that looks familiar. And so we can identify this is a free-living blue-green alga, which is the cousin of the chloroplast living in plants. Here is the free-living bacteria, a proteobacteria, which is the cousin of the mitochondria. You can see like, yeah, even that. Yeah, neat stuff, neat stuff. We're a team. Our cells are teams working for mutual benefit. I'm sure there's a moral lesson in there somewhere. What can I help you?
Avian flu.
Uh-huh.
Did you hear that there was like 200 snow geese that died
I didn't hear that. No.
near Allentown? I get
Snow geese near Allentown. I've seen them there a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an article in New York Outdoor News. It's like something fishing, trapping, magazine, and it was in there, this issue. If I remember, I'll bring it into your next week.
And he made a comment about avian flu. Scares the heck out of me. And the main reason it scares the heck out of me is in 1918, there was a Spanish flu that came out, wiped out 40 million people, and then went away. And like it was devastating. All right. But then all of a sudden it was gone. And then it was like, will it come back? What the heck was that? And they found some people frozen in Alaska who had it. They were buried, and there was this one really heavy woman buried in the tundra, and they could get tissue from her lungs that had it, and they could sequence it to find out what it looked like. It's in the same group as avian flu. So, when you say, oh, here's an outbreak of avian flu, you say, ugh, like I remember this one. Yeah, this was.
Well, the problem is it jumps to animals, the dairy herd in California.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's already in.
Wow. Wow. Something to watch, then. Something to watch.
Yeah, something to worry about too. But
yeah.
Can't do anything about it.
Good night, everyone.
See you next week.
The whole avian flu thing.
Uh-huh.
Several months ago, I wrote to